What's going on, everybody? Here with another episode of the Strength and Knowledge podcast. I'm very pleased to bring to you today Dr. Andy Seraphin, who is the owner of the Football Physios, and I have to make sure that I say that correct for my soccer people out there. But he is about to dive in to his sports residency, and among some other topics that we're going to jump into today. I am in particular very, very curious about just what his process was like to choosing A, that I want to do a residency, and then B, how did you choose upon the residency that you were in? And we'll get to that in a second, but welcome, Andy.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Josh Funk. You're incredible in what you do online and both in person with your people in clinic and the mentoring that you do on the side. It's very good to have you in our profession.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And admittedly, I've just kind of been following you. I think we've been more connected on Twitter and just enjoy seeing young people. They're graduating and they're hitting the ground running. I was actually just talking to a couple other people on podcast interviews that'll be soon to be released as well. People who made the most of a very challenging time period. And I don't know if the pandemic kind of pushed you towards a residency at all, but I would love to know a little bit about what led you to deciding that residency was a good fit for you, and then talk a little bit about the selection that you made.
Yeah. So, I mean, residency, it's something that has been on the back of my mind for the last few years. And earlier on, as in my time as a student, it was kind of like that thing where, you think that it is absolutely necessary in order to achieve something high level in the sports world. And that's kind of what my mindset was at first. And then as I was going through rotations and meeting my two really good mentors in my first two clinical rotations, they kind of pushed me in a different direction, saying like, hey, you don't absolutely necessarily need to do a residency. If you do it, though, it should be something that is completely tailored to your goals. And graduating from school, I was still kind of unsure of it. And I know a residency is something you really have to give 100% to. And I was like, let me kind of explore things for the next year or so, see how they go, and then I'll decide from there. So my biggest passion is working with soccer players. And my mindset at the time was, well, I'm going to find a soccer team that's a little bit lower division where I can learn, grow, and apply my skill set too. And I found a team. And I was working with them for a few months from July until about January. And during that time, that's when I realized where I need to be better, right? Because if I want to stay at this level, this kind of semi-professional level, then yeah, I'd be okay. But I need to be extremely precise in my skill set, in my knowledge, and in my rehab processes. And to do that, I need to learn not only from someone who has a high level expertise, but specifically in the sport and clientele that I want to work for, being soccer players. And there's a few residencies I think that have a bit of a soccer focus, but Orlando Health, from my research, really was the best one for me. They sponsor Orlando City Soccer Club as well as Orlando Pride. They have some of the best players in the world. Nani and Pato from the men's side, Alex Morgan from the women's side, and they have a great relationship with UCF as well. And I was like, man, this is perfect, right? Because if I want to work in soccer at the highest level, I need to up my game. And for me to not only apply my skill set, but also learn from some of the best people in the world, how they do it, like that's a no-brainer for me. So I applied to Orlando Health and was accepted, and I will be going down there in about a month and a half.
Well, congratulations. And I know that you're up, back home, obviously in a much colder climate. But talking specifically about, your soccer, your passion for soccer, you've been pretty clear about your aspirations, right? Whether or not it's working in MLS, the NWSL, potentially the Haitian national team. But just a tribute to you, recognizing that mentorship, the environment, the way in which, honestly, you just committing to certain processes that I think are going to absolutely get you to where you want to be. But when also talking about some of the mentorship and the people that you've had exposure to, I mean, you've probably been in one of the better educational settings when it comes to DPT school. When we're talking about your DPT school, right? You Duke Blue Devil. You've spent time with, other Dr. Ryman, Dr. Cook. You mentioned Dr. Covington a little bit. Talk to us a little bit just about your undergraduate experience and how that really maybe shaped your views as a clinician, and potentially who you are and how you're practicing today.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it starts for me in undergrad actually, when I was at Temple. And when I was at Temple, I didn't really have like a clear vision. I was definitely not somebody who was applying to PT school thinking like I want to work in professional sport. I actually had a different mindset at the time, a little bit more of like the healthcare administration, population health kind of mindset. And then I went to Duke, and what I think that Duke really gives every student is an opportunity to pursue what they really want to do, like what their passion is. Whether that be through the way the program is structured, even now with some of the more specialty tracks that you can opt into earlier on in your curriculum, or through some of the clubs and SIGs that we have, or just even the willingness for the faculty to connect you with other areas of the university, like sport performance or athletic training. They are really, really supportive. And when they see somebody with a passion, whether it be sport, orthopedics, neuro, advocacy, they support the student 100% in doing that. And that's why I went to Duke University. I can definitely say that's what I got from my experience there.
Yeah, and I think that your experience is echoed by many other people who have been fortunate to go through their time at Duke. When it comes to education, I know that you're also pretty big on patient education and just the impact that it can have. Are there any particular things that stand out for you when it comes to creating an environment where education is a priority and making sure that it is something that makes long-term impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy because I think as physical therapists, one of the most common things that we do see that we really shouldn't is somebody coming out of a surgery and be like, yeah, I had knee surgery, ankle surgery, shoulder surgery. And he'd ask, well, what is it? And they're like, I don't really know. And I'm like, okay, let's figure that out. And let's tell you exactly what happened. And that way, whatever feelings or sensations you're having in that body part, maybe they'll make a little bit more sense to you. And because of that, maybe you'll be a little bit less fearful and you're able to buy into the rehab process a little bit more. So whenever I eval a patient education is absolutely essential for me, and kind of breaking it down, not really in physio terms, but in more layman's terms, so that way they can understand it. I love to use 3D anatomy apps. Essential Anatomy 4 is an app that I use in PT school, and I like to use that in evals as well as even just drawing too, right? Because from some of the kind of infographics that we see on Google Images, I see that they're a little bit nocebic, right? And they tend to scare people a little bit. So I might redraw some things and explain that to them, just to break it down for them in a way they can understand.
Yeah, and I think that's just critical to having people who can walk out of their time with you and actually be able to relay what was communicated them to other people. I mean, sometimes the people who we work with become advocates to the profession. And sometimes when we don't use language that allows us to connect with them and level with them, they might be in a situation where they have trust in us, but they can't really communicate what's going on in the session, what they're supposed to be doing, what their long-term prognosis is. And it's hard for them to really share that experience if we're using language that is way over their head. So sometimes, right, it's the difference between being smart or being relatable. And I think that, I'm hearing that from you when it sounds like you making sure that you want people to have relatable education or information provided to them. I see that a little bit as well. I mean, you have a pretty impressive football physios account on Instagram. I don't know if you're on TikTok as well. I can only keep track of so many different platforms. But when coming up with an account, right? You're trying to curate content that people can relate to, that they can enjoy. And I think you do a really good job with that. Are you able to share a little bit more just kind of about the thought process that goes into that? And just, talking about that account as a whole. I mean, what do you have, 20-some thousand followers or something like that? I mean, it's off to a great start.
Yeah. And it's kind of been like a fun project for me in the past few years. I started it in PT school, and I remember I was in a fantasy football league with some of my friends from back home. And whenever somebody would get injured, they'd ask me, like, oh, what's this injury? Like, I want to know how long he'll be out for, da 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 da. And I'm like, oh, there's something here. So I started posting firstly about American football injuries. And after a while, I was like, you know what, this is a lot of work, right? And I think this is kind of something that I really took hold of, and I still carry with me to this day, is I was like, if I'm going to do all this work on the side and it's extra, and yeah, I'm learning a lot from it, I want it to be something that I'm passionate about. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to switch to soccer injuries. And then from there, because I loved watching soccer, I was watching all the games anyway. I was like, yeah, this isn't too bad. I'll have a game in the background, make a video about an injury, break it down really simple. And yeah, and I think part of the reason why my explanation started so simple is because I didn't know that much, right? I didn't have all the knowledge of rehab protocols and everything like that. I just said, hey, here's the injury, here's the body part, here's the estimated recovery time, and that's about it. And people really love to know about that stuff, right? So that's kind of how it started. And eventually I started making some more videos about exercises and everything like that. And then after all, I was like, man, like I feel like I can help people, right? Not just in terms of providing content, but in terms of training. So about year and a half ago now, when I finished one of my strength and conditioning internships, I said, I'm going to train people starting for free. So I found some soccer players and trained them for free for a few weeks. And then that slowly grew. And right now I'm training about 4 or 5 people through online training. And yeah, it's a nice little side hustle for me to do in my off time. And it's a great little Sunday project. And I love doing it.
And I mean, I think that's a win-win. Side hustles are something that everybody's talking about more and more. And I think that the more that you can find something that leverages both strengths and passions in your free time, you don't have a ton of free time, right? I mean, you just wrapped up school. We're busy enough with a day job, and your side hustle has to kind of fit synergistically into your lifestyle. I hope that it's something that you're going to be able to continue to maintain throughout your time down in Orlando. I mean, obviously, you're going to get to deep dive into that soccer world a little bit down there. But for you with football physios, and talk to me about fitness and sport training, and how you also get, somewhat creative with regards to mixing the two.
Yeah. And I think in the pure fitness and rehab realm, we as physical therapists and strength and conditioning coaches, we tend to remove the sport element from our conditioning or rehab process in general. And I think there was a time where I believed in that absolute statement, where it's like, if you want to focus on endurance, take the ball out. If you want to focus on speed training, let's do it, take the ball out. But what I really saw with my experience with New Jersey Teamsters, as well as working with people in person, is your outcome from training will be highly dependent on the amount of effort that your athlete gives. And it's every time I see a person, and you see them with the ball and without the ball, their passion and dedication and effort level rises tremendously with the ball, right? So if we can find a way to integrate some of our sport elements into our rehab and fitness programs without detracting from what we want the adaptation to be, then I think that adaptation that we're looking for will come a lot sooner, and the athlete will enjoy the process a lot more.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it makes me think of, and I forgot the exact quote, but something along the lines of people fell in love with a sport, not in love with training, right? They train because it is a part of their sport and they recognize the benefits that training can have on their sport. But at the end of the day, they fell in love with sport. So I just think of kids and, you roll the ball out on the field and their eyes light up. If you were to tell them that they were about to do squats, push-ups, and potentially run hills, I don't think you would see anybody with a little glisten in their eye. So I think that's especially important for people as they're going through the rehab process. If you can introduce it early, obviously that's great, especially finding ways to incorporate it in later stages of return to sport. But I do like how you also mentioned that it's important that we only maybe add so many variables. And if we add too many variables, it's actually going to take away from any one given thing potentially improving. Sometimes I see people and it's probably not without great intent, but they add too many layers to a drill and it might be difficult, but I'm not quite sure that anything was actually improved upon in that given scenario. But for a lot of these videos and some of the stuff that you're doing with people, I mean, you're not using a ton of equipment. And I know that it's something that is intentional, being able to provide people with the opportunity to do rehabilitation or performance-oriented work without equipment and without a gym. Can you share a little bit about why that's such a priority for you?
Yeah, I think it's a priority for everyone at this time because the majority of people living in the world right now do not have access to a gym or can't get there because of COVID or whatever reason. And even if you think about like how many people are on Earth right now, like 7-8 billion, and they all need to be healthy, right? How many of, like, if you had to take a percentage, how many of those 7 to 8 billion have a gym? Probably not that much.
Yeah, especially if we're talking about like home gyms. And then, like you mentioned, access to a gym right now is definitely challenging.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I kind of see it is there are so many areas of fitness and sport training that you can improve on without any equipment, right? So even if you take a exercise such as a rear foot elevated single leg squat, right? Not too many people can do that proficiently with high volume, right? So now you already have like one kind of base exercise where you can really work with a lot of people on, because chances are if they do it without any weight whatsoever, they'll have some sort of benefit. So whether that be sport training or fitness training or rehab, I think if you're creative with your exercise prescription and you know exactly what adaptations you're looking for, there's a lot you can do without any sort of equipment, especially if you're sport training, right? Because if the main goal is to decrease injury risk, and you know that in certain sports, there are certain muscles that are more at risk for injury than others, then maybe you can focus your fitness training on those. I think it's a very important thing to consider. And that's not to say there's no benefit. There's a huge benefit to being in a gym with proper equipment and doing a proper program. But the ceiling for, I think, body weight training or equipment free training, I guess we can call it, is a lot higher than most would think.
I agree. I mean, if you just take some of the things that you just mentioned, I mean, I think of a rear foot elevated split squat. I think of a very range of motion. It's a challenging range of motion to get into. And then it's also a position that demands tremendous amount of stability or control in the presence of change when performing an activity. So you couple that with the fact that you could add even more range of motion, elevate a front foot, or if you get into some of the other ways of progressing body weight activities. I mean, one of the things that I think is most humbling for a lot of people is anything in a bear position, right? I could be doing things in a hands and foot position that could really challenge me outside of just doing a bear crawl. So then we get into true single leg exercises, whether or not it's skater squats, single leg sit to stands. And then I always have to remind myself that people need baseline competency of just moving themselves first. If I was working with a young person who was just starting to get into training, I probably would want them to get competent with self first before I even started worrying about some of those external devices or external pieces of equipment, obviously, as well. So with with your training background, I mean, I heard you say a strength and conditioning internship. At what point was that in your educational career? And then do you have any particular influences or places in which you've really drawn a lot more information or just been educated more through a certain person or way of thinking?
Yeah. So I did an internship at the end of my second year of PT school. It was outside the curriculum, but at the time, our summer curriculum for the end of second year was pretty wide open. We had about 1 3-credit elective that we had to do for the entire summer before we went off on our rotations. So I reached out to a bunch of people in the area, and I ended up doing a 400-hour internship at Athletic Lab in Cary, North Carolina. And it's owned by Dr. Mike Young, who is one of the leaders in the world for speed and track and field and fitness training in general. And it just so happens to be the home of training for North Carolina FC as well as NC Courage, who is also in the NWSL. And they have some of the best soccer players in the world there as well. So I was like, man, this is again, it's kind of tailor-made to exactly what I want to do. And I'm going to spend a lot of hours there. And I did, but it was relatively easy for me to commit to because, again, it was something that I was passionate about. So I learned a ton from him. And I really base my therapeutic exercise off of a lot of what I learned in that facility at that time. And can 100% say I wouldn't be going to residency in Orlando if I did not do that opportunity. And yeah, it was amazing. And I was able to apply it from there on out. And I would say that was my biggest inspiration and where I learned the most from.
I had no idea about that prior to getting onto this conversation today. So I always enjoy little surprises, and that just further adds layers to like this who's who of people that you've gotten to spend time with. I mean, I've known Mike for I don't know how long and been following his work. I mean, he's somebody who is tremendous for our field. That's pretty awesome that you got to spend time. I mean, I've seen, and I don't know if they still do it. Do they still do a lot of the national championships in Cary, North Carolina? They have a pretty nice stadium that I think they've been using there for a little while.
I am not too sure. Honestly.
Okay, got it. And we'll kind of take this back to what we were speaking to earlier, which was focusing on certain muscles or movements in sport. For you, unpacking the sport of soccer. And recognizing that certain injuries do happen more often when playing soccer. What has been your experience so far? What are some things that people need to consider? Or overall, I mean, just what are some things you've learned during your time period, just immersing yourself in the sport?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that I found working with soccer players and athletes in general is they dedicate so much time to perfecting their craft that they maybe don't understand the anatomy and physiology of the human body. And oftentimes it takes an injury that results in them losing an opportunity in order for them to truly respect the limitations or anatomy and physiology as a whole, really. And my goal is to educate them and to have them buy in to our fitness process before they lose that opportunity. For the club I was working with, it's actually a brand new club, and every player that was there was a trialist. And it was a pretty interesting opportunity because everybody that was there was competing against somebody else for a spot on the team that wasn't guaranteed. So when it came time to relating information for injuries and things like that, there was a little bit of gray area. And we had to be pretty upfront with them saying like, hey, our goal isn't to take a spot away from you. It's to keep you on the field. And in order to do that, we have to be knowledgeable and share information about the body. So our main goals with soccer players in general is to prevent injuries. And if you break the sport down, the most impactful injuries tend to be muscular related, being hamstring and groin, as well as some higher grade level ankle sprains. And yeah, ACL's in there, but ACL, honestly, the incidence isn't too common. So I like to focus more on the musculature. And when it comes to prevention, it's like, okay, how do we break that down? We go to the literature and we see, okay, well, Copenhagen's are great for the groin. Nordics are great for the hamstring. We need a good sprint volume every week in order to keep that volume up so we're not seeing sudden spikes. And we need to make sure your lifestyle is on point with sleep, nutrition, exercise. And that way, every time you come to the field, you're as fresh as you can possibly be. So that's pretty much what I focus on when it comes to preventing injury in soccer players, as well as integrating that within the rest of their full fitness program.
I like it. And I'm a little bit curious as well. When you refer to educating them on anatomy and physiology, is this just the fact that more necessarily isn't more better? I mean, is it more like, more training is not more better, more working out's not more better? Or is it educating them on lifestyle and the influences that lifestyle can have on recovery? Or maybe none of that, but I'm just curious about what some of those central conversations are.
Literally everything.
Yeah,
I will never forget the one day I was on the field and players were switching drills and a guy came up to me. He's like, man, my calf hurts. I think I have a calf injury. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm doing all these tests on the sideline, testing calf flexibility and extensibility and strength, and nothing was popping up. And then I was like, okay, just point to me where it hurts. And he pointed to his quad. And I'm like, that's not your calf. We have a much bigger problem here because we're not speaking the same language, right? So I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to educating our athletes on just the basics of the human body.
I never really would have imagined somebody being at that level and having that conversation, to be honest. It almost seems a little bit surprising. I wonder how often that happens, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I played lacrosse up into college, and it's kind of hard to imagine. Not to say it's it doesn't happen more frequently, but obviously that's a huge part where, like you said, I mean, you have to speak from a common baseline before you deep dive into anything else. But when it comes to injuries and these athletes and working with some of them who find themselves kind of in this injury cycle, the word injury prone comes up at times. What are your thoughts on, people who kind of get caught in this chronic injury cycle and somebody who maybe is termed injury prone?
Yeah. So the term injury prone, I think it's a very unique one. I was actually on Twitter the other day, and there was a discussion going on about being quote unquote injury prone in the NFL. And they pretty much led to the discussion to the point of, okay, if there's injury prone, that means there are players who are injury free. And how common is that in the NFL? And I think the percentage was 2.8%. So that kind of leads people to think, oh, okay, well, maybe having an injury isn't the most weird thing in the world, which it's not. I think if a player is injury prone, they perceive themselves to suffer a lot of injuries. Maybe it's time they take a look at who's on their team, right? Who is there to support them? And oftentimes at the semi-professional or youth levels, it might not be many, right? You could be on your own if you're a trialist, or maybe it's just you and your sport coach, or maybe you go to a school that doesn't have a full-time athletic trainers, or their duty is split between multiple teams. And you say, okay, how do I add to this team? Is there a physical therapist or a strength coach that I can go to that can give me some sort of guidance to get me out of this? Because clearly whatever I'm doing right now isn't the answer. And maybe I need to be a little bit more open as to what another solution may be.
I am definitely with you on that. I think far too often, I don't want to say there's like a blame game that goes on, but it's either people are, getting external feedback, and it's, oh, why are you injured again? Or you're hurt again. Or, I mean, I'll be honest, even in settings that I've been where people are like, a person's kind of a gimp, all things that I think are just not productive to be having that conversation or saying that to that person. who obviously is going through, outside of the physical injury, probably a lot of psychological challenges as well. And I can definitely get on board with the fact that, you know what, maybe it's the supporting staff, maybe it's the information, maybe it's the people that are supposed to be supporting that individual that are potentially missing something. So yeah, I mean, somebody who's in that situation probably, hopefully, well, I should say, hopefully doing some self-reflection and maybe making a change. Speaking of just making a change and just talking more about the career side of things, what are some situations that you found yourself in over the past year? You know, you gave it a year before deciding upon a sports residency. It was during a pandemic. What are some things that, you know, you've experienced that you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I was in PT school, I was very outcome driven. Like I was like, I want X or Y, and what's the quickest way for me to get there? And I'm slowly learning that life is not like that. And if that is your goal, you may get what you want, but your journey won't be as fruitful as if you focused on the journey. So that's kind of where my mindset is a little bit right now. And I think it's been about 6 or 7 months since I graduated. And I think that time has been very helpful for me before residency, because I know the basics of physical therapy in terms of, okay, I know how to manage a caseload, and I feel comfortable doing an eval, and I know how to do my notes. So that way, when I go to a residency program, I can focus all of my knowledge and effort on improving my clinical practice. I think that's the biggest takeaway I've had from the year, and like I've experienced like exactly what I want to get better at, right? I've been on the sideline of a team talking to a coach and saying, hey, this player is going to be out for 3 to 4 weeks because of a hamstring injury. And the coach says, can we make it 2 to 3 instead of 3 to 4? Right. I know what that kind of pressure feels like. And now I have a direct reason for me to give 110% effort into a residency.
I love it. And it's going to take me into my final question of the day, because we're about to kind of put a bow on this thing. But for somebody who has had the amount of experiences that you've had, the people that you've interacted with in such a short period of time, and you also sound like somebody who has a certain degree of certainty about your future, about what you're shooting for, if you could give some people that are either right in the same position you're in, or potentially about to make some of the decisions that you've made over the past year or so, what recommendations do you have? I mean, what guidance can you potentially provide those people?
Yeah, I would say if you're in school or working, or kind of that awkward gap in between, is get out of your bubble a little bit, right? There's only so much you can learn in the 4 walls of a classroom or a clinic. And it's going to take some extra effort. And that's not to say, like, definitely give 100% in school or clinic or your job or your degree or whatever, but it's going to take something extra outside of that, right? It's going to take you going to volunteer for a youth program, or doing an extra internship, or whatever. But whatever that is, it's going to require 100% from you as well. So that's why I would say find something you're passionate about, so that way you can do that with comfort and ease.
And you're fortunate to also have combined passion with stuff that you're good at. So it's always a sweet spot. I'm very, very excited to just see kind of your trajectory, to be quite honest. I've been following it along a little bit. I'm excited for you. But Andy, for people that want to reach out to you, maybe something resonated with them, or maybe they're just a little bit more curious about some of the topics that we touched on today, where are the best places for them to connect with you?
My DMs are open on Twitter, so you can contact me there. It's Dr. Andy DPT, as well as on Instagram at the Football Physios, as you accurately pronounced, football with the U. And yeah, you can hit me up there, and I'm pretty good with responding.
Okay, awesome. Well, Andy, thanks so much. I was looking forward to this, and I really appreciate your time today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on.